Hi, thanks for joining me here tonight. I'm Catherine, and we're going to talk today about Election Day and why I think it's a great idea to make it a federal holiday. First, I'm going to start though and ask you a quick question. Did you know that this year alone, there have been over 400 bills introduced by state legislators, making it harder for everyday Americans to vote? I'm going to share my screen here to show you a map of these 18 states that have enacted over 30 new voter restriction laws. And this has been since July 14 of this year. This has been reported by the Brennan Center for Justice at the New York University School of Law. So why are some lawmakers working so hard to stop you from voting? And why is voting and democracy often synonymous? These are the points that we're going to be talking about in my presentation today. So democracy has given us our religious freedoms, our workers' rights, and most importantly, and as shared on this quote here by H.L. McKinnon from chathamhouse.org, democracy provides a mechanism or form of proportionate representation with citizens empowered to bring about change through participation and persuading the powerful to act for the greater good. In my presentation today, I'll be addressing the following points of discussion as they relate to the importance of voting rights and why a national holiday for Election Day is a great start to celebrating our democracy. First, we'll have a quick history lesson and look at the dates in our country's history that are really important as far as voting rights go. Secondly, we're going to talk about why there's some deterrence to voting. And then last, we'll talk about the celebration of democracy and why it is a great idea for our country to have this day where we can all gather and celebrate the right to vote. So with the issuance of the Declaration of Independence in 1776, voting rights were given to male landowners that were 21 years or older and Protestant. And because you needed to be landowners in order to vote, the majority of the voters were farmers. So Election Day was formally signed into law in 1845, and it is held the Tuesday following the first Monday of November. At the time that this was made, it made sense because farmers typically went to market on Wednesdays. Sundays were restricted for going to church and for family time. Early November makes sense because it's after their crops have been planted and harvested, and it's still early enough in the season where they're not going to run into too much weather situations in order to get to their polling places, because they're not just around the corner at that point in time. They're going to be going typically on an overnight trip in order to reach their polling place. So as time went on, the demographics of our voters started to change. The first significant change came in 1870. That's when it was declared that a voter cannot be denied because of their race. But they didn't mean that this opened the floodgates up for African Americans to vote, because what they did instead is certain states put in voting tax and literacy tests to deny the vote. So there was still a significant fight that needed to be made in order to have the African American vote happen. Then back in 1920, women had their rights to vote extended. And then very importantly, in 1965, the Voting Rights Act was passed, and this was a landmark federal legislation prohibiting racial discrimination. So for this 189-year period, everyday citizens, just like you and I, stood up and demanded that we have our right to vote. And that is why the freedom to vote is America's most important right. So if this right is so important, why did only 55.7% of voting aged Americans vote in the 2016 presidential election? Well, it's a question that has many complicated answers. Research has shown that there's a socioeconomical barriers that exist for those Americans that live in poverty. Some states require that you show a state ID in order to vote. And a lot of people don't have that in the poorer communities because they don't have the money to have that renewed every year, or they may have transportation issues, not only going to the polls, but going to places like a department that deals with issuing those state IDs. Also, working class Americans typically don't have paid time off to go to the polls and wait in line. And then families are busy with sports for kids after school. People say that they're just too busy to stand in line. I'm going to pull up another screen here to show you that the United States here ranks 26 out of the 32 OECD member countries for voter turnout. And out of those 32 countries, 27 have some sort of policies regarding voting requirements to make it easier for their residents to go out and vote. So these barriers, even though they're systematic in nature, they can start by being addressed by making Election Day a federal holiday. It's not a foolproof way to suddenly change the problems people face getting out to vote, but it would encourage us to exercise America's most important right. Some have suggested calling Election Day Citizens Day, which I really like. It's making it a celebration versus a chore. So Art Jen Fung and Jane Mansbridge wrote a piece, an opinion piece in USA Today on October 26, 2018. And here they say that people in workplaces, schools, communities across the country could organize themselves together to reflect upon our country's remarkable achievements. Children and adults could help out at their local polling places and so renew a generation of poll workers. Finally, after everyone has voted, we could have barbecues and block parties in the churches, schools, and community centers where we cast our votes across the land. So now that we have discussed the history behind voting rights and have seen the systemic factors that disenfranchise certain voters, it's clear Election Day is something to be celebrated by all citizens, young and old. And the great thing is, even though it's not a holiday right now, there's things that we can do to celebrate Election Day, and we can make a difference in getting people to show up at the polls. Some of these ideas are listed here in my slideshow. You could work with the managers and owners where you work to create a company-wide holiday for Election Day. Students on college campuses, the staff and faculty, they can work to create campus-wide education and celebration events. At home, you can organize picnics and parties with friends and neighbors, celebrating those who did participate in voting. We can also offer a hand to those that aren't able to get to the polling places by giving them a call or also giving them a ride. But most importantly, you need to use your voice and call your elected officials when there's important legislation being voted on, especially when they're affecting your voter rights. Making Election Day a holiday, it's actually a bipartisan issue. 59% of Republicans agree on making Election Day a federal holiday, and 71% of Democrats do as well. So the more our elected officials hear our voices about this matter, the more change we are going to see. So finally, I'm going to encourage you to be the change you would like to see. Make sure that you make it to the polls. It may feel like a chore to get there, but when you walk away from the polls with your I voted sticker, you can't help but feel pride and a connection to those who have fought before you to make your right to do so possible. Thank you for being here tonight with me to talk about this important issue. I hope that you were able to learn a little bit more about why it's important to get out and vote. And hopefully we will see Election Day become a federal holiday. Have a great evening. Thank you so much.